Hello and welcome once again to The Booking Club, the podcast that brings you today's leading authors and commentators from a table at their favourite places to eat and drink. I'm as ever your host, Jack Aldane, and the author I'm speaking to on this episode is Megan Nolan. We meet in Brooklyn, New York at her favourite spot, the Paddock. For this recording in New York, the nearest subway station to here, I can just see across the road.
That's Fort Hamilton Parkway.
Yeah, I got off there earlier, walked up here to Le Paddock, which is my guest, Megan, you've just heard there's favorite restaurant, I'm guessing, in the local area, if not the whole of New York?
Yeah. So if I'm going for a special dinner, probably I'll go to Manhattan, but this is, a neighborhood restaurant.
Megan Nolan is my guest. She is the author of several novels, Acts of Desperation and Ordinary Human Failings, and I believe a novel that is currently in the works. I don't know the extent to which you want to talk about that on this episode, but I'd welcome it if you do.
It's actually not a novel, it's essays. So
Really?
Yeah, I'm doing my first nonfiction.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, loosely linked through a certain theme. So I initially wrote it straight through as nonfiction, but then I'm now kind of reworking it into essays.
Of course, some of the themes of this conversation will touch on things that aren't altogether to do with fiction, although they are in some sense. The fact that as a journalist, you've recently been covering movements and organizations that are trying to reverse the effects of a post-literate trend, habits that people have formed, a move away from reading. And I'd like to know your concerns as a writer about the way you see this going. But to start with your work to date, you have 2 novels under your belt.
Yeah.
How have the last few years of publishing been for you in terms of coming to know yourself better as a novelist and planning forward how you want to write in the future?
Yeah, it's funny, like as you're saying that, I'm kind of realizing how my instinct is really to cut off everything I do once it's done. So like part of me, a big part of me stopped thinking about them as soon as they were done. And that's like on purpose, I do disengage and don't really feel that compelled to know what people are saying about them after they're out or after I'm, obviously there's like an initial post-publication period where you're very aware of all that. But I think for me to be able to move on to the next thing, I do kind of leave them behind a bit. And I don't know, it's kind of, I suppose the nice thing is that you see them doing their own thing, like the novels and impacting people in ways that you had nothing to do with almost. And I suppose that, probably one of the nicest parts about publication for me is being translated. So I think that's the most active, ongoing engagement I have with my novels is that because they continue to be translated. Obviously like these things happen not all at once usually. So at the moment there's a new one out in Portuguese of the first novel. So that's like 5 years later.
Yeah.
And so I think that's been the main way that I remain engaged with them is through translation. Yeah.
Obviously both novels tend to deal with human relationships, but that's a very broad way of describing it, drilling down beneath the surface of that. What have been the themes really of your writing to date that speak to your obsessions or your preoccupations in life? What have you found has compelled you to write in fiction to date?
I don't know if it's what compels me, but I think the common ground between my 2 novels, which are very different in form, and one is very autobiographical and first person and very immersive in a single perspective, and the second is like more of a social novel and involves a family and a kind of multi-perspective plot. But I think the common ground between them is that they're both circling shame in different ways. So the first one is about a young woman who's obsessed with a man and like the way that she degrades herself to make this connection and then to keep him and then to be like the perfect partner to him and her kind of self-awareness of these things as she's doing them and the shame that accompanies that willing self-degradation. And in the second book, it's a lot about alcoholism and kind of family secrets and how things that cause shame can like spiral's the wrong word because it's like more of a quiet process, I guess, but like that shame can seed itself in different ways in a family and kind of descend into these long silences, even in people who literally live in the same house. So I would say that that's like the common ground of my work in general is like some kind of treatment of shame and like interest in shame.
Yeah. And you said that one of the 2 novels was autobiographical. I understand it's the first of the 2, Acts of Desperation.
Yeah.
What then made you leap from something very personally inflected to something that felt more like you were looking as an outsider in?
So on one level, I think it was quite functional that when I was writing my first novel, I didn't do an MFA, I didn't study, I didn't go to college, and I didn't have any like grounding in that world, and I didn't have any I didn't feel any authority to write a novel. And so I think pretty consciously I was like, I need to ground it in things that I do have authority over, i.e. my own life, basically. And that I don't mean that in terms of like all the events are transposed from my real life, which they're really not genuinely, but the things that are transposed are like the structure, like the narrator's demographic, age, you know, where she's from. Those kinds of things helped me to feel like, okay, I at least have authority over these things, so that will help me to write a novel, which I feel very daunted by otherwise. And then I think, you know, just from having completed that and that going well, I didn't start the second novel until after the first one had been published, so it was, you know, I felt more on solid ground and that I could be a little bit more ambitious, and also I just would have no interest in doing that again. I think I have a very bad attention span, and like that can be used positively in that I don't ever really feel compelled to do the same kind of work twice in a long-term project. Like obviously in my journalism or whatever, I'm kind of returning to the themes often. But yeah, in terms of a book-length project, like it takes so long and is such a burdensome process in some ways that I don't think I would have the energy to do it if I didn't feel like a new challenge.
Well, thank you for bringing us out here to Brooklyn for this
Sure.
episode.
Like, I love my neighborhood, but it's not really a restaurant neighborhood. So, like, I think this is one of the, you know, I would go on a date here, basically. And that's not true of many places in my neighborhood.
Okay.
But also, I think it was because you and I discussed it quite soon after I'd been here for a really nice party with my friend Dan Paddock published a book, and we had this, like, big group dinner for his launch, and it was really nice and made me remember that I could hear. So yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
You're an Irish writer, born in Ireland.
From Waterford.
And then moved to New York when, and how long have you been based here?
So yeah, I'm from Waterford. I left, I was in Dublin after school for 6 or so years. Then I was in London for 10 years, nine years-ish. And so I moved here, I'm 35, and I moved here full-time 2 years ago-ish. But I was over and back a lot between London and here. I just made a bunch of friends here, so, and also had work things here. So I was kind of like, you know, I would spend like 3 months here and go back to London and so on. And then I got my visa and came over properly 2 years ago.
So when it comes to the literary scene of New York, I mean, I'm assuming that you know it quite well. You've been based here long enough to really kind of know it inside out. But where do we find New York and its literateurs at this moment in history? Where are the pockets of activity that you're seeing? Yeah,
it's funny because I guess like before I moved here, I was actually a little bit more participatory in that culture, and that's kind of part of what brought me here. And now that I kind of am more settled here, I'm you know, I have a different kind of life now. I have a partner and he has kids, and I don't have the same sort of like social life as I did when I was just spending time here as a visiting writer.
Yeah.
And then I would go to like all the parties, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that was definitely part of why I was attracted to here and I was feeling a little done with London, and that was partly because I did find it so exciting here to, you know, like the quality, I don't mean quality, but the like atmosphere of book launches and parties and so on which just felt really different than, like in London it felt like I was always going to like my parents' party when I was going to book stuff, and like I had to have good manners, and yeah.
Like the atmosphere was more stilted.
Yeah, and like it's not like a class or age thing even. It just felt like that's a grown-up world, and it's like very pro, and I need to portray myself as though I'm very together. And it was like the opposite of that in New York. It was like, this is a bunch of kids who were just like throwing silly parties, and like I'm probably the oldest or among the oldest. And I think a lot of the events and obviously this has radically changed in London since I've left, in terms of, I know everyone, like there's like everybody has a reading series in London now, but the parties that were being thrown here that I was going to, they weren't like necessarily to launch a book, although there were those also. People were just putting on readings all the time. And like that appealed to me, because when I started out in Dublin, before I had any writing career, a lot of what I was doing was performance based. So like there was more like traditional like open mic stuff where people would get up and read poetry or whatever. But then there was also like things that were happening in an art world context in galleries and I was reading a lot in those spaces. And that was really what started me writing properly, was that I was performing all the time, and it felt more like that here, that people were more invested in live experiences and being together in a room. And like that part of it wasn't just to commemorate a book being launched. It was like, oh, we can just read anything that we, you know. and obviously this goes too far sometimes, but people being like, I wrote this today and I'm going to read it tonight. That's fun to be able to have spaces to do that in, even if it doesn't make for the best quality readings all the time.
Let's have a look at the menu.
Yes.
I was scanning it earlier, and I quite like the look of their, I can always eat an omelette, but is there anything in particular you recommend?
I usually come here for dinner, so I've only really had this steak and burger here, and French onion soup is very good. But I think I'm going to get a French onion soup and maybe some side salad or kale or something.
Yeah. I may go for the croque monsieur. Well,
that sounds awesome, yeah.
Although I've just seen an omelette go past, and now I'm tempted by that. Speaking to Ross Barkan, the ex-City Hall reporter, author of Glass Century and Colossus, he was telling me about the Metropolitan Review, a new publication through Substack, about where he sees the opportunities, the missed opportunities, and where things may be growing and dying in the literary world across the pond. Do you think that there's always a risk that unless that enthusiasm is constantly fed, it can wither very quickly? It's easy for us to become snowblind. We care, therefore it's in rude health. The broader appeal and the broader kind of longevity of it, I think, is always in question.
I agree with that, but also, I guess I'm both maybe more cynical and more hopeful about these things at the same time than a lot of people seem to be, in that I never thought of it as a mass industry, but I also believe strongly that there's a contingent of people who will always read serious fiction, and it's not enough people for any of us to comfortably make a living. But I also don't really think that's going anywhere. So I feel I both see it as a insignificant cultural presence in some ways, but also a one that I don't really doubt is going to be here for the rest of my life. Could I please have the merguez sandwich? I haven't had that before. That sounds good. Yeah, I'm actually going to get a Bloody Mary, please.
What soft drinks do you have?
It's a mint lemonade. That's nice.
Oh, mint lemonade. Yeah, that sounds great. Oh, you didn't go for the French onion soup in the end?
No, I thought it's boiling hot now.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? I hate this weather.
Do you?
It's been so... that combined with sleep deprivation over the past few days.
I was just saying to David, my boyfriend, that because it's been freezing here until now, till literally right now.
Crazy, isn't it?
And it's okay, we'll have 3 weeks maybe where we're not complaining about it being either too hot or too cold.
It's just turned on a dime.
Yeah.
You said at the start of this conversation that you too struggle with your own attention span.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that this is partly what drove you to write that long feature for The Observer, where you spoke to this organization, Friends of Attention.
Yeah.
And their efforts to combat kind of the slow kind of depletion of our resources to stay on topic and focus our attention on things for longer than 10 minutes. How much of that revealed to you what you've been experiencing versus, what could be broadly said to be a wider societal issue? And
for sure.
And what are the important things that came about from that?
I think the main thing that I came away from, just to briefly sum them up. So they're it's quite hard to sum up because they're quite disparate organizations, because they originated from a kind of art practice background where there was a festival where these different artists and thinkers started talking about this problem, this question of attention, and they became this kind of very loose collective. And so that's still the basic premise of what exists now as the Friends of Attention, but it has these different offshoots. There's a more kind of academic side because some of them are professors. There's this School of Attention where they do intensive workshops around attention, and that's open to the public. And then there's kind of more long form and a little bit more obtuse art writing about it. So it's this kind of big collective of different approaches to the question of attention. And I would say the thing that and it really was substantial, I have to say, on a personal level, not just writing about it, that I came away from was not to think about it as, oh no, I can't have my phone because it's so bad for me, in a punitive, self-recriminating way. Because I think that it's that's the kind of natural way that I have conceived of I'll be kind of berating myself for not working hard or correctly or paying engaging with my work in the right way because I am so distracted by email and phone and blah blah blah.
Is this the influence again of shame on your life, on your work?
Yeah, I've definitely always been I should be able to what's wrong with me that I can't where's my willpower? Why can't I'm an adult, I'm an autonomous adult, why can't I do the things I say I want to do and I do want to do? And that just it just seemed ridiculous that I couldn't do, because I always felt the desire to be working, genuinely, I like working, and yet I wasn't doing what I wanted to be doing, and that always felt very confusing and shameful. And I think talking to the Friends of Attention folks was a good it was important for me one thing, they have like a lot of more specific like evidence about how impossible those companies have made it for people to do what they want to be doing.
They've got it down to a science.
Exactly. And so I think that I learned a little more about that than I knew, about like just how effective they are at that stuff, and to take away the individual, not like totally abdicate any responsibility as an individual, but to understand that you are being manipulated in a way that's not just going to be solved by you having low willpower. And then also that they were really against, there's a lot of tools that you access on your phone that you can use to like limit your time, freedom and that apps that like where you only have limited internet access.
That's right,
and you like
yes.
set it for like these times per day. You only want to be able to use a Word document or whatever. And there's a lot of different tools like that now to like address, because obviously there's so many people who are upset about how they spend their time now. And I do use those sometimes, but again, it never like really felt good to me. And I kind of understood more why it didn't feel good when I spoke to these people, because they were again saying like you shouldn't treat it like, thank you. You shouldn't treat it like, yeah, that's really good. Like you're punishing yourself. You're actually like getting, if you can like learn to reframe the question of attention, you're getting something that you may never have had before, or you haven't had in a very long time. And it's not like, bad, like bad
Yes.
baby, you can't have your toys. It's actually, you're opening up so much to yourself if you start to like reframe how you think of attention. And again, just that it's not punitive, that you're not like, no, do your homework, look at the good screen and do your good homework on there. Don't look at your bad screen. Like that. It goes beyond that to like paying attention in the world and like walking around and looking at things in a different way and noticing things in a different way. And that's very related to like writing practice, obviously, is like part of what is really fun, and both like what is rewarding about being a writer and kind of why people do become writers, like the kinds of people who become writers, is that it's like almost an excuse to notice the world in a certain way and like to participate in the world in a very focused way. And I feel like that experience with Friends of Attention made me remember why I like that, like why I value that and why I became a writer. And it's not that I then, suddenly had no attraction to wasting time on my phone. It's just that it didn't, I think I was more able to reframe it as like part of the reason I do waste time on my phone is that either I'm just like talking to people, like I'm just talking to my friends, and it's kind of hard to be like, oh, I don't, like that's such a bad thing to do, because it's like, well, I love talking to my friends, and that is a big part of my life. And so it was kind of like useful to reframe from being like, oh, there's this inherently toxic object and that's my phone, to being like, oh, the reason I'm on my phone a lot is because I love engaging with people. And of course you can like do that not on your phone, and you know what I mean? And it just kind of helped me to reintegrate like what the things I enjoy a little more.
So if I understand this correctly, what the Friends of Attention are arguing, or at least what you've taken away from it, is that we do everything for a reason, and the important thing is not to castigate ourselves, but just ask, what nourishment are we seeking in our phones, and then where can I get that isn't on my phone? And
yeah, I had this really interesting conversation with Alicia, as one of the women, one of the three kind of founders of the movement, and co-wrote the book that they were promoting when I interviewed them. And I was saying to her, she's a little older than me, but we're a similar generation. And I was saying to her, like, I don't, because I always have been a little prone to like immediate validation, or like immediate pleasure, I suppose is the word. When I was a kid, if I had like boundless internet access as a kid, I don't know if I would have bothered to be writing when I was a kid, because there's a lot of what compels me to write that is superficially rewarded by social media, which is just like connecting with people and feeling understood or seen. And when I was a kid, I didn't have a way to do that wasn't writing. So I was writing, And I feel like if I had social media from the time that I was 11, I probably would have been like, this is great. I can connect with people and people know what I'm all about, And I don't know if I never would have written, but I don't think I would have been as serious about it.
The writing life requires an appetite for solitude, and conversation can kill the creative instinct, because you can spend a lot of time expressing yourself verbally, and finding that you've sated that need to as you say, be understood, which the writer ideally has to hold back. It makes me want to know whether or not, as a writer, you have struggled with the pull of a smart device to check or research or verify or explore an idea through another medium other than through your own mind.
Yeah, I don't struggle with that only because I feel like a lot of the stuff that I'm interested in or I'm trying to convey is like completely my subjective interiority, and it's like I'm the only one who knows about that, and it's quite somatic, you know, like a lot of the ways that I found into the character or to like get into a certain scene in that book and the second book was to be like, what does that person's body feel like when that kind of thing happens, and just like try to focus on that, you know. I think so. Yeah, I think the only equivalent like risk for me is just like endless research and deferring actually writing. But I mostly get away with that because by like, yeah, I have a period before a big project, whether that's like a long article or a like now this book that I'm working on, where I will, you know, I'll allocate the research time and I'll make a document, an offline document with everything. And I might not have read it even yet, but I'll like collate everything that I think might be interesting. And so I can kind of like, you know, go through that as I want to, but I'm not on the internet going like, oh, what would that street look like in 1970, you know, and like kind of going off on these tangents. Because I guess, you know, that is obviously the most alarming thing about internet use now is like realizing you've just been doing something for 80 minutes and you don't really know what you're doing, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a horrible feeling.
Yeah,
it's
it
a
really
horrible
is,
malaise.
yeah.
And I think a lot of people suffer this too, the constant beration of themselves on the basis that as an adult they feel like I should have intentionality and I should have autonomy and I should be able to have a thought, a desire, a compulsion to do something and then simply do it. Where did the thread of that thought go? Why couldn't I follow up on it? It's almost bigger than literature. It's bigger than reading. It affects all aspects of our lives.
Totally. That feeling of not doing what you want to be doing, it's very interesting to me because I've also started both doing and like reading a lot about like psychoanalysis in the last while. And you know, there's obviously, before there was any internet, there's your motivations are always interrupted by things in your mind that you do not know are going on, or you can't sense fully what's going on. You know, there's like Bible passages that very explicitly say like, why can I not do what I want to do? Which I find really interesting. That's just like a perennial problem of feeling like I genuinely want this, but I am not doing it. And I remember once like I think I write about that in the Intensity piece, that we're making a list of like trying to be brutally honest and being like, what do you do every day? How do you spend your time? And like writing it down in quite minute detail, and then being like, and how do you want to spend your time? And writing that down in minute detail, being like, that does not align whatsoever.
It's a good exercise.
Yeah, it is. It's
More
useful.
of us should do it. Getting back to the subject then of reading and how we spend our attention as readers, I feel more and more that there are things novels can do that nonfiction simply can't. It's obvious to anyone who has read fiction that this is the case, but I'm curious to know your thoughts about what specifically you have found, both as a reader and lover of fiction and also as a writer of fiction, that novels achieve consistently for the reader that they simply cannot get from any other kind of book.
I possibly am or like para quoting Anne Enright here, but somebody that I admire at some point described novels as being like the only form that can contain multiple opposing perspectives at once. And I feel like that's what I get from a novel that I don't get from anything else, like including films and music and other art forms that are very important to my life. But I feel like the novel is the only place that it satisfies like one of the fundamental things that I find frustrating and engaging about the world is how little I understand other people and how little others understand me, and how that's, you know, widely applicable to a lot of people, even if they don't feel it acutely. My feeling about things is that we all are very limited in our understanding of each other, and that I find that very sad and like difficult to work with at times, and also because, you know, like I'm very, very social and I love being with people, and so it's this thing where I'm really driven to be around and with other people and to talk to other people. But I also feel this burden of like, I don't know how much any of us are really able to imagine the other's life or inner life. I mean, and I feel like novels address that like impossibility. And that's exactly what you're describing there. Like in my second novel, I had this, usually each project that I've done in terms of books, like just starts with this like feeling that I want to convey, and nothing very specific, but like this energy. And with the second one, I had this feeling of like, oh, there's like a central event, and I want to have this family like revolving around the central event, and to see just how disparate all their perspectives and experiences of that event are, and how they came to be so disparate, even in an ostensibly close, as in physically close family. And yeah, there was no way that I could ever have addressed either like the plot that I did, or the like social issues that I was interested in that book, in terms of like poverty and shame and anti-immigration stuff. And there's, I'm a journalist as well, so like obviously I can write about those things from my perspective, but to be able to convey them in a symphonic way was only possible in a novel.
How has reading novels enriched your life, enriched your understanding of yourself as a social animal? Is there a sense in which reading novels makes it easier to function socially? Or does it simply just allow you to accept your own confusion?
Yeah, I think that's the case. Like, I think, as in the last part of what you said, I think it's helped me to understand that I will never have, I think it's a lot about control when you're frustrated that you can't understand another person's, or you can never know another person's inner life. That's very, for somebody who likes to have control or like know what's going on, that's very difficult to deal with sometimes. And when I was younger, I couldn't deal with that, and I couldn't stand the fact that, like, for instance, a person that I was in a relationship, I would never really know what they thought about me. And even if I trusted them, I didn't know, there was no fact. And I really struggled with that. And like, that made my personal relationships, certainly romantic relationships, very stressful and very tense, because I was constantly thinking like anything could be going on in there. And not in a good way, And I guess now I think anything could be going on there in a good way.
Was there an experience of reading a novel that made you relieved to realize that the confusion wasn't your enemy, that it could be a strength, or it could just be enjoyed as a universal human predicament?
I think actually for me the big reading, and I think obviously these are technically novels and they're not what we consider classically a novel, but like the Knausgaard books probably were the first thing that I read that made me feel differently about that like suspicion of the other's interior life.
Which novel in particular? So
like his My Struggle series, I read all of those, and it was probably the first two that I think I had a big impact on me in that time. And that was kind of partially because he's such a male, he's such a masculine writer but then he's so unsparing in like detailing his sordid inner life over these 6 books that just on a very basic level, it was like, oh, okay, someone who presents as like, visually, that guy to me seems like the most withholding and reserved form of masculinity that basically terrifies me. But then to see it like exhaustively broken down into these moments of complete vulnerability was quite transformative for me as a reader. And to fully, even though I knew this was true logically, that men have this like fully complex set of emotions and vulnerabilities, as I also do, I think I didn't really know that on some level. And it was like, oh, okay, it's a person like me. Men are people like me. And that was useful for me personally. And yeah, I think that in general, I mean, the novel like makes me feel less alone as a form, but there are like specific books like that reveal something about a kind of person that I didn't know before.
If you were to meet a male reader who was curious to find the equivalent from a male perspective, what would you recommend he read?
That's a good question. I really like Mary Gaitskell's short stories. They're not like necessarily realists, so I don't know if it's if it's an equivalent comparison, because obviously Knausgaard is only realist, and some of hers are quite exaggerated and kind of hysterical or something. But I feel like she has the most. I definitely felt the most like seen as a woman when I was reading some of her stories. And yeah, I think like as more classical novels, like Anne Enright's novels are awesome, and they really feel like, I really feel like that is that woman's life after I finished. Like her book Actress is very important to me, and I think, yeah, that was one where I came away feeling like that really was a perfect rendition of what it feels like to be alive as a woman. Yeah.
Well, I often ask people at the end of these recordings, I sort of neglected to do this with both Jay and Ross, to tell me the best book that they've read so far this year. Mm-hmm. And finally, who would be their ideal literary dinner date of all authors, dead or alive? So let's start with the first question. Mm-hmm. What is the best book you've read so far in 2026?
I would probably say it's a nonfiction book, actually, called The Only Cure by Mark Solms, Solms. So he's a psychoanalyst, but he's also a neuroscientist. So he has this kind of unique confluence of, authority on the mind and the brain. And his ambition with this book is basically to marry a little bit to historically opposing views on the mind. So, obviously in his analytic career, he's studied Freud, and there was a time that Freud was completely out of fashion in terms of how to think about the mind and how to get better as a mentally ill person. And actually a lot of the things that supposedly discredited Freud's theories over the last 100 years have been, thank you. A lot of Freud's theories have actually been, validated by contemporary neuroscience that was not available at the time. So there's a lot that he got right that people disagree, that people kind of on a theoretical level disagreed with and disavowed and discarded from his body of work that have now been pretty well credited by the facts. And so this book kind of there's people who address the mind who are totally pharmaceutical about it, and they think it's a brain chemistry thing, and you take antidepressants and they do this, or at least you can try these different medications, and I take medication also, but it can sometimes go to a degree where it's and it almost doesn't matter what happened in your life. This is just like a physiological thing to address.
Yeah, the mind is just a color palette, and you just need to get the right shade.
And other people are the
happy.
other. Yes, and other people go to the other extreme and are it's only talk therapy. That's the only thing that can possibly address. And basically, this book I think is a really good attempt to put those two sometimes competing attempts to cope with depression or all kinds of mental illness, to put them in alliance rather than competing.
And finally, your dream literary dinner date.
An author.
An author could be anybody.
Oh, it would be Sam Lipsyte. He's him. He's a novelist. He teaches at Columbia, and he's a really amazing author, and I met him at a literary festival that I just came back from, and he was very fun to drink with also. So I'd say Sam Lipsyte.
Yeah, most guests choose somebody that they're never going to meet.
I'm just no, I like my friends. Yeah.
You've got a collection of essays coming out. I know there's only so much you can tell us about them, but if you can give us a little teaser as to what's to come next from Megan Nolan. It's not going to be a work of fiction. So
I'm writing a book that I started about maybe 2 years ago and wrote it straight through as nonfiction, just as a book. I completed that draft and sent it to my editor, and we both agreed that it would be better served as essays and split up into those. And so I'm doing that at the moment. And so there's a basic thread through all the essays that has to do with my dad, my actual personal dad, and then also fathers more broadly, and also the fear of them dying and how to cope with that anticipation of a parent dying, kind of. And obviously having just gone about Freud for ages, how one's parental relationships color obviously kind of everything in a way, so my essays are sort of offshoots of what those things color in.
Megan Nolan, thank you very much for joining me on the Booking Club. It's been wonderful to meet you here at the Paddock. The food has just arrived. I've got my omelette. You've got your merguez sandwich.
Yeah, looks good.
This has been lovely. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.